All right, welcome back to another episode of the Blockrunner podcast. I'm your host, William, always here with your co-host, Iman.
What's going on, dude?
And on the sticks, we got TJ.
Hello.
All right, and joining us today, finally, we got CBSpears from Blockspace Media. Thank you for joining us, Charlie.
Hey, guys. Yeah, I've followed your podcast since all of us got into Ordinals. So I've been pretty impressed by how prolific you guys are. But yeah, glad to finally be on the show. The only other better looking camera podcast in the business.
Well, credits all to TJ here.
Yeah.
Oh, stop it.
Hey, yeah, dude, claps for yourself, dude. I don't know if you want to hit
finally.
that button. Yeah.
Round of applause, TJ.
I had no idea there was a third person. I didn't realize.
Yeah. Work in the shadows.
Yeah, he's a true anon. Nobody has seen his face.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. You have to kind of guess his appearance. But one day we'll have like a big reveal, right, TJ?
It's not that impressive.
At 100K? 100K face reveal?
Ooh. 100K ETH?
Oh,
that's right. He's
good luck with that.
Someday. We'll see.
Yeah.
Good luck with that, TJ.
But yeah, dude, good to have you on too. So like, I'm glad. I didn't know you've been watching us since the beginning. That's pretty cool. It's good news.
I tune in occasionally. I take little snapshots of the ecosystem, and you guys are increasingly more part of the ecosystem. So
yeah,
I gotta keep tabs.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, we're trying our best to.
Yeah, we see you in the comments. I see your comments every now and then, Charlie.
Yes, specifically, whenever you had Murad on your podcast recently, and he dropped like Bitmap and DMT, and you DM'd us like, "Hey, he's a fan of Bitmap." It's like
it's funny because like I don't pay much attention to Bitmap or DMT, but I thought I was like, "Oh, okay, Iman, yeah, Will, these guys are really into this. I should let them know." So
yeah. Well, I appreciate that, like that ping, right? Because then we got to watch that interview.
Yeah.
And the community was going nuts over this stuff because we kind of like, we definitely put him on the pedestal like everybody. Like I even created like a derivative version of him, Meme Coin Moses.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw that, Charlie.
Yeah. So we're kind of playing along, right? Because we spent, I mean, to be honest, the last year or so we've largely faded memes in a sense, just because our background is more like on the development side of things.
Fundamental.
Specifically around the metaverse, right? So we're like, okay, yeah, memes are interesting. Clearly people like them. People are making a lot of money from them. But, we were under the impression that it really wasn't going to like take off the way it is now. But whenever Murad stepped on stage, he really just, he killed it as far as like wrapping it in like this very cohesive context.
Yeah.
Right. And
I mean, he's got a long history of being one of the people to really identify a major trend and then to communicate it in a very visceral, compelling way. I think if you listen to the whole podcast that I did on Bitcoin Season 2, I kind of start out and I say like, I reference a lot of his talking from 18 and 19, where he did a very similar thing with Bitcoin, where he said, I'm going to give you a lot of the tools for how to think about Bitcoin. Here's why I'm very bullish on it. And so it's funny because I actually view the way he talks about meme coins as kind of like another version of what I saw him do in 18 and 19. So there's a lot of parallels over this past half decade between these two periods in crypto.
That's interesting. Because he was a little bit more swayed than I was about memes. And, he saw an opportunity and I was like, you know what, it's probably going to be an opportunity, but it's so random that I don't feel like I can participate just because it's just, I don't want to spend time doing that really, just like a random casino, but not until
like a whole different side of your brain. Like it takes, you have to refactor all your information pipelines. You have to refactor how you make decisions.
Right.
I wouldn't recommend it for most people. I actually think understanding how things work at a technical level is a disadvantage when trading memes. I think it is inversely 100%. Proportional. So you'll find people who are new to the space, who don't really know how shit works, they'll probably be very well positioned. And you see this already, like my dumbest friends are already absolutely killing it right now.
Yeah.
that's an interesting shift for sure.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. And once I saw that video, so Iman found it and he says, dude, you need to watch this.
I said the
entire team
video
of
the last 4 years.
Yeah.
That was the way I had to put it on a plate for you so you don't just like not watch it, right?
Right. And so as soon as I saw it, I was convinced. I was like, okay, it's like this speech makes a lot of sense. And what really shifted my mind was like, I understood that anyone who'd watch that video would be clearly defined that they would be more interested in meme coins after watching that video, just like I was. And so now it's like all of a sudden there's so many people in meme coins. Like we're getting phone calls about family members watching TikTok and asking us about meme coins.
Yeah.
And so like now I get it.
Those are the same people who didn't listen to us when we told them to buy Bitcoin and when it was like 15K, 16K, right? It's like,
yeah. I mean, that's how it was in 18 and 19 when Murad went on a similar campaign talking about how, like his bullish case for Bitcoin. And so he actually defined a lot of the talking points that I think modern laser-eyed maximalists use. So a lot of the the words and catchphrases and the mental models they have derive partly from Murad like 5 or 6 years ago. And it's actually interesting. I think I brought this up in the podcast. That was one of the this chart from Murad from like 2019 is one of the first things I ever inscribed because I didn't really know. I didn't think ordinals and inscriptions would take off. And I was like, okay, well that's fun. What do I put on here? And I was like, oh, I could put like the Murad chart. Everybody knows that, but he's become way more famous for his meme coin thesis.
Yeah,
and but like I mean I get it. He's a wonderful communicator. I think. My spicy take, though, is he has picked these tokens which he thinks are cult tokens. And I think he is directionally correct on memes, but I think he's again, just like with Bitcoin, I think he's probably not going to execute well. What a lot of people know is he liquidated a whole fund back in 2020 because he was giga long Bitcoin. We had the COVID crash, which blew the whole fund out, and he went silent for a couple of years. And I think if I could predict, and Murad, if you're listening to this, I'd love to follow up with you. But I think he is probably positioned, and he's very convinced that the specific assets he is long on are like the ones because he's done the work and he knows all of this. But I think he might be a little mispositioned because my view is, I think I talked about this in the podcast. I asked Murad, do you think the majority of these multi-cycle meme coins have already been created or have yet to be created? And his point was that he thinks they've already come into existence and that he's probably identified most of them. And I disagree with that. So that's my short kind of capstone on that particular conversation.
Yeah, I tend to agree just because, for example, Ordinals is relatively new. It's 2 years old. And there's only a handful of products from the Ordinal ecosystem that can only be done on Bitcoin. And when you look at it from that perspective, it's very likely that someone like Murad probably hasn't seen those products yet. I mean, obviously he's talked about Bitmap and DNT, so there's some exposure. But from if you just zoom out, there's no way that Murad has picked the top 10 and the only 10 that are going to explode. There's going to be more than that.
Yeah, and it could be something that plays out over, additional cycles because of how nascent everything that's being built in context of the Bitcoin ecosystem is, right? So we don't really know the far end of, how things are going to emerge, right? So that's a good segue into kind of introducing, I guess, your unique positioning within being an observer of this whole thing that kind of manifested itself over the last couple of years, because you have the pre-ordinals context of things of how the Bitcoin landscape was pre-ordinals and then now what it's becoming, right? And I think you better than anybody can kind of translate everybody's perspective, I guess, from within the Bitcoin community, right? Because we're new entrants and we've heard it's quite the disruptive to the maxi side of the community. We don't really know those people too well, but we hear a lot about them.
Yeah.
So give us your interpretation as far as who's right, who's wrong about all these different discussion points. Is ordinals actually a good thing for Bitcoin? Are there actual potential really negative consequences to it? Give us your whole take on that.
Gosh, I could give you a couple minutes, or we could talk about this for hours.
Right. Yeah.
The I early on I struggled with whether I thought ordinals and inscriptions, or really just arbitrary data on Bitcoin, was risky or harmful to it,
Mm-hmm.
and it required that I talk to a lot of my more technical Bitcoin friends, and it required that I learn a lot more about Bitcoin itself.
Mm.
And I'm of the opinion that it has negligible additional harm to Bitcoin, and I think it actually accelerates Bitcoin towards being a better monetary network. Yeah, I think people who are critical of it can be critical of the social layer, saying, well, a lot of these are assets which are similar to other fiat type assets or the crypto assets, which they don't care for. I think that is a good criticism. However, to say that these things are bad and they should not happen on Bitcoin flies in the face of what one of Bitcoin's core purposes is to be permissionless. And if Bitcoin is a permissioned network, then it is not fulfilling its purpose.
Yeah.
And so it's designed. We've made decisions in Bitcoin history to like be pretty cautious with how we we do things, so that we can like let things happen to Bitcoin and see if it survives. So far, it survived. I think if I could give some context, if you were to roll the clock back to, I think, when Iman and I both listened to Andreas for the first time in 13 or 14.
Yeah.
The Bitcoin culture was not as fragmented as it is today. It was kind of all like the post crypto or cypherpunk like movement. There's a lot of speculation. The difference between Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies was very thin. If you owned one of these, you would probably interact in the broader crypto ecosystem. It was really only post ETH ICO and then the block size wars in 15 through 17 that I think we saw the Bitcoin undergo its first real major contentious hard fork. And then post block size wars, a lot of the technical discussion in Bitcoin began to languish. And a lot of the Bitcoin cultural drive came from talking heads, kind of like myself, but I would say much less technical people who begin to bring in certain cultural and moralist components to it, saying, you've got to eat meat and you have to believe these things, and you are bad if you touch other cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
And that meant that the average Bitcoiner was probably not as in tune with how Bitcoin itself worked. They understood why Bitcoin was good, and they attached a lot of additional things onto it. So basically 19 through 22 and 23, I began to feel kind of disillusioned because the Bitcoin culture did not really seem very familiar to me. And we now look back on that and we say that is this like hardcore laser-eyed maximalism culture that was forming.
Yeah.
Ordinals brought in a bunch of fresh blood, people who don't really care if you go between Bitcoin, Solana, and ETH, or more agnostic. And it's brought those people into Bitcoin, and it has brought all those people into Bitcoin in a way where they're much more in tune with how the network itself operates. I think this cannot be stressed enough, is that the average Bitcoiner since Ordinals has become way more technically proficient.
Yeah.
And this is very good. And you really have not seen this in the hardcore Bitcoin maximalist camp. I will say there are some very good Bitcoin maximalists who are agnostic to ordinals and inscriptions. And I think that is the best position to have, because if there are people using Bitcoin for things which you think is goofy or weird or you don't understand, or even better yet, stuff that you hate, but yet you still support their right to do it, that is the sign of a healthy Bitcoin network.
Yeah.
So that's my kind of short version treatment on this subject for you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I think last time I looked it up, it's like Bitcoin is essentially in the hands of, I think, 5% of humans on Earth, right? I mean, does that sound accurate to you? Like 100 to 200 million people or something like that?
Yeah, it can't be over that for sure.
Yeah, so it runs into the idea of who are these 5%ers, right? It's probably people who are a little bit more they have an aptitude towards understanding, monetary systems and financial literacy, I guess is how you would kind of like label that, because that is kind of like the umbrella narrative of Bitcoin, since I guess the Satoshi white paper, and then this culture that you're describing is like a maxi. We need to preserve that as much as possible. But now with the injection,
well, one of the things I'd point out is that particular narrative is really like 2019 to present. Like prior to that, Bitcoin had undergone other like narrative cycles of it being a payments network, which then led to the fork wars.
That's right.
We actually had a whole debate during the operatorn war days of 2013 and 14 on the subject of arbitrary data inclusion. And what's funny is all of the talking points of Ordinals critics today are just rehashing the exact same arguments we had in 13 and 14. So virtually nothing has changed since then. And so like, I think we're actually coming out of an era where Bitcoin is exclusively this monetary network.
Yeah.
And it's now going, I would call, how we have this idea of price discovery of assets. We're going into a period of narrative discovery for Bitcoin.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think one of the more surprising things that the laser-eyed maxis, their narrative was, Ordinals is a bad thing. Bitcoin shouldn't have this arbitrary data. But what I found surprising was that Ordinals and things like runes, they kind of helped to support the security of Bitcoin by encouraging people to spend Bitcoin. And so I just still don't understand like what the argument that they had was against Ordinals if it actually helped the security of Bitcoin. Like, is there anything
I can do a decent argument. The ones that make sense are that it distorts the incentives of the users of the Bitcoin network, and users drive future development on Bitcoin typically, and they have outsized influence in discussion of consensus, perhaps soft forks. Also, if you believe Bitcoin is exclusively for money, then things which are non-monetary use cases distort the incentive model of Bitcoin and therefore threaten its permissionless nature. My point is that I think while runes and arbitrary data tokens are kind of distorting it, I don't see that they're distorting it very much. And this is also in the face of the reality that we are 15, almost 16 years into the lifespan of this network. And the majority of the transactions are for relatively low cost fungible token mints. So I would say that it is incumbent upon the people who want Bitcoin to be money to start using it like that. Because right now it's very inexpensive to use Bitcoin. So I'm going to put my fucking JPEG on there because I can. Yeah. And like the way you stop that is you price me out. You bid out my ability to cheaply put fungible token mints on there. Because until then, I'm just going to keep putting random shit on Bitcoin because it's cheap. Like I know we still spend a lot of money on it, but like in the grand scheme of things, like in 20 years, it's going to be much more expensive to use Bitcoin. And in the meantime, I'm going to use it how I want. I think that's like my short response to that.
Essentially, let the invisible hand decide how the network is used. If people want to trade pictures, that they're going to trade pictures. If people want to use it as money, then use it as money, and then that's the use case that's going to dominate. So I have a question for you, Charlie. What is the ultimate narrative for Bitcoin outside of like Ordinals and all this? Like, what is the point for Bitcoin?
Oh, that is a really good question. I normally don't give this answer to like a new person on the street asking me this. I would say Bitcoin is just magic internet money. Yeah. It's good, hard money. It's like gold, but for the internet. To you guys, and because you guys think about these things and you're pretty into the conversation now, I get kind of metaphysical about this. I think Bitcoin is a consensus network. I think it is very good at helping all of us come to consensus about the ordering of things. The most obvious thing we need to have ordering of is money. And I think that's its primary use case, is to separate money from state as we have separated church from state.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when we talk about ordering and sequentiality of shared consensus, money is also a form of information which is transmitted and preserved. So I think Bitcoin is really a timestamping database. If you read the white paper, which is here before me, Satoshi describes Bitcoin less as money and more as a distributed timestamp server. And I think people may not appreciate the importance of this simple mechanic, in that it works to order events. In this postmodern era, again, I said I get kind of metaphysical, in this postmodern era where it's very difficult for people to see what is true and not, we have manufactured consensus. It's very easy to delude people on the internet. I myself have struggled between understanding if I'm talking to a real person or a bot online now. We are entering into an era where objectivity is very difficult to find. I think Bitcoin is the foundation upon which we find shared consensus of objectivity. So that is what I think it is. I think it's this evolving timestamping consensus network.
Yeah, I mean, when you said metaphysics, I was in already.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, yeah, we're totally in line with. So I like the fact that you're kind of in alignment with us of Bitcoin's in like a discovery, narrative discovery, I guess, phase. Because like you said,
Yeah.
it's already kind of experienced that a couple times previously, right? And now that Bitcoin is kind of evolving into an ecosystem of its own, you know, if the last narrative you kind of want to identify within Bitcoin is like we've become like this copycat ecosystem of just
Right.
things that have already kind of occurred on other chains, other environments, and not introduce something new like a vector of that is leveraging something that is innate to Bitcoin itself that other chains cannot replicate, right? Because Bitcoin it's singular, it's standalone. It's a reason why every single cycle the market leads with Bitcoin, and other chains like Ethereum, you know, they're obviously very replicable, right? There's tons of other essentially clones in a sense of Ethereum, or a programmable smart contract chain essentially, but they don't share the same properties of Bitcoin, and I don't think human beings would probably ever be able to recreate that, right? So it makes a lot of sense to discover what are those properties of Bitcoin that do not have, I guess, counterparts throughout the broader ecosystem, and how do we leverage that? How do we tap into that, and therefore create this new narrative for Bitcoin in itself, right? So that has been largely our focus, and part of what we've attempted to introduce with DMT, this whole digital matter theory concept, is taking that idea that Bitcoin is transforming energy into a new layer of basically a mutable substrate, like that can be leveraged for digital creation, right?
Yeah.
Something that we've labeled as essentially as like a non-arbitrary attempt at creating new digital assets, right? New digital creations. And
Yeah, when you say metaphysics, I mean, I like to call it digital physics, because in the same way that we can't break the laws of physics, we cannot break the data within Bitcoin. And there's a lot of established parallels that just go even deeper and deeper. I guess let me play out a simulation, a hypothetical situation for you, Charlie.
Lay it on me.
So the idea of right now, Trump, we got, you know, the election. Gary Gensler is resigning in about 2 months.
Get him out of here.
Yikes.
Right.
Yeah.
We have all these things happening. They're trying to add Bitcoin to the national reserve. Other countries are going to copy the United States. We're getting to the point where there's a high potential that Bitcoin becomes a low velocity asset, meaning a bunch of people, a bunch of countries hold this asset. They really don't trade it. It's probably $1 million, $10 million, doesn't matter what it is. But the point is nobody's really trading it. At a certain point, there isn't going to be enough fees to kind of support miners. Do you see the same thing as we see it, or do you have a counter kind of like angle to this?
Gosh, you got right into one of the existential questions of Bitcoin. Most of us, myself included, assume that Bitcoin eventually has to transition to a fee revenue model for miners. It's really a question of on what timeline and how does that happen. You know, I don't know that it is urgent that it happens now because Bitcoin's new issuance is still 3.125 Bitcoin per block, and Bitcoin can go up really high, and that can still pay for miners in like their fiat, primarily US dollar denominated terms. But I've been in Bitcoin a long time, and a lot of us have thought for years that a transition to way more transaction activity, way more fees per block has been right around the corner. And yet 2022, we saw fucking nothing. I mean, it was the most, if you look back, we saw absolutely no transaction activity on Bitcoin, the oldest cryptocurrency network, while all of the other hot new blockchains had very robust, very dynamic transactions and demand for their block space. And I saw that as a existential risk, and I was pretty depressed. Even though Bitcoin still going up, I was like, I and many other people were like, this stuff needs to be on Bitcoin. I don't really think I'm agnostic about this idea of a DEX, but regardless, that is clear product user demand and clear like product market fit. Something like this activity needs to happen on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So that's why I kind of found myself very early on leaning entirely into Ordinals. I've stumbled into this accidentally. I was just hanging out on Discord with Casey as he was about to release it. It was a kind of weird fluke, but that's why I see all this activity and I say, I don't care if it is like meme coins or weird meta protocols or whatever. Like, I want people to use Bitcoin. They end up with more Bitcoin. They are driving forward significant developer activity. And this is really important because, as you said, like if Bitcoin is this low velocity network in the future where nation states just hoard it, then they become outsized economic voices in Bitcoin consensus. And so those nation states will advocate for Bitcoin to become a thing which they want it to look like. Bitcoin is kind of the sum of all of its parts. Whoever is using Bitcoin and participating in Bitcoin consensus gets to dictate what it looks like. If nation states are the ones using it, they only use it to stockpile and hoard more Bitcoin, then that probably turns Bitcoin into a thing which it hoped not to be, which is inaccessible to the average person. The average person would have a lot of difficulty self-custodying. That would probably, I think, recreate a scenario which looks very like the existing financial system today, which I do not like. So I like anything that does not look like state actors hoarding Bitcoin. As much as I want a strategic Bitcoin reserve, because I think that's good and smart for the US to do, that's not real like gets me up in the morning. I want more people to do Bitcoin and do random shit on Bitcoin, whether it be speculation or real like high level, brilliant developer backflips on it. I don't really care. This is why I would say like a very progressive approach where I would say I am a very hardcore Bitcoiner. However, I'm indiscretionary about who is using it and how they're using it. Because I think if there's more people who use it in ways that I find kind of obnoxious, the better. That means it's working. And so, so that's my view. We need more transaction activity, and I want to encourage people to do that.
So the underlying motivation to want transaction activity is really because in the year 2140, and in this extreme scenario in 2140, there's no more subsidy. And the only thing to sustain the security of Bitcoin would be what's left, which is the fees of transactions. And so the thought is, if there are no transactions, there are no fees. And if there are no fees, there's no reason for miners to keep, the power on. Right. And then
and this may happen sooner though. So this is why I say it's an issue of timeline.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Because 3 more halvings, and we go from 3.125 to 1.75 to 0.8 something to 0.4. And so in 12 years, you got 0.4 new Bitcoin per block being issued. So if Bitcoin is $10 million, that's $4 million per block, add inflation, and then consider the fact that miners now need 3 orders of magnitude more power to pay for. So like, that's not very much. And I just think that if we're in the mid 2030s and we haven't developed a robust fee market, like we are now in existential risk territory.
Yes.
So
I totally agree.
I
totally agree.
What is the approach? So how or where are, because that your other miners in the network essentially are of this like existential threat? Is it something that's being swept under the rug? Future generations problem to solve?
It's global warming, Charlie. It's nothing to worry about today.
Yeah. What is the sentiment?
It is kind of like global warming in that like it's this problem. It's not specific. It probably has to be solved, and not everybody agrees on it.
Yeah.
So fees are like that. And in the past, we've had the luxury of like fees not being an issue. So like most people who have had this concern, they don't really get a lot of traction because like it's currently not a pressing issue on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I would say miners, I say this all the time, but I don't think it like crosses over enough into like Bitcoin economic participant territory. Bitcoin miners are pretty oblivious to fees. They're actually pretty oblivious to a lot of the things that you guys talk about. They're pretty oblivious to ordinals, and they're pretty oblivious to like Bitcoin developer discussions. They are in the business of standing up large data centers, which have skill sets which are inverse to knowing how Bitcoin works. So if you look at a lot of the public mining companies like financial models over the next 10 years, none of them take into account fee rates. If you look at how Bitcoin miners project their revenues going forwards, it is exclusively a relationship between block subsidy and price. And it is not incorporating a bullish case for fees on Bitcoin. I think that may change a little bit, given that we have seen for the first time ever fees in a bear market thanks to ordinals and runes. But this is still this. It is not crossed over. Like you guys talk more about fees than the Bitcoin miners do.
Mm-hmm.
That's the crazy thing.
See, I find it weird. If I'm a miner and I'm asking, $100 million investment from all these like LP providers, and I'm going to buy a bunch of machines to turn these things on to mine Bitcoin, and I'm giving a 10-year projection, I know that Bitcoin is going to have, meaning my bottom line halves every 4 years. And I know that within a reasonable future, that once Bitcoin has to like 0.4 Bitcoin per block, I know that there's got to be something more to sustain my business. Like, how is this not a bigger conversational piece than it already is?
You're asking the same question. It kills me. It like drives me insane. This is why I'm always talking about fees on Twitter and in all my content and everything. Like, I think, and I talk to Bitcoin. I'm a Bitcoin miner myself. And I talk about this all the time. The majority of Bitcoin miners, though, they have to deal with things which, as I said, really don't have anything to do with Bitcoin. They have to deal with large industrial power agreements. They have to deal with like complex electrical buildouts. They have to deal with zoning law and contracts and weird capital instruments and getting kicked out of the bank. Like every Bitcoin miner that I know has been kicked out of the bank multiple times. And you are always trying to navigate these things because your goal is to turn all your machines on and keep them optimized. Yeah. So the actual modeling of like future revenues has never really been the driver of a lot of these Bitcoin miners' decision making. They will typically take a short-term cyclical approach to capital deployment. And if the market's down, they try to deploy capital. And when the market's up, that's when they typically try to mine. There's not a whole lot of like really sitting really far back at a high level and saying, well, what does this business look like over the next 20 years? There's really like a dozen or so, I would say, mining talking heads, of which the Blockspace mining pod is the leading one. Like we have the largest mining podcast, right?
Mhm.
So we are in the center of like all of the mining conversation. But there's just not much discussion on it. If you talk to some of the C-suite people at like these major public companies, like they don't really think about fees. They're in the business of raising money from public markets.
So this is there's an underlying assumption within this conversation that I think is going unsaid, but the assumption is that if you're raising $100 million to turn on a bunch of miners and you're doing these 10-year projections, the assumption is that Bitcoin every 4 years will at least double. Isn't that correct?
Yeah. And it's more than done that. And I think it will continue to do that. But at some point, it doesn't do that anymore.
Right.
And the question is when. And that's when we need to have created a fee market.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a game plan essentially.
All right, man.
Yeah.
Take it away. So we're going to pitch something to you, Charlie.
I think.
Okay, run it by me.
This is actually your pitch to make, dude.
All right. How about digital physics, Charlie? All right. Hear me out. As crazy as that,
I'm listening. I'm all ears.
yeah, as crazy as that sounds. So what we're doing now with DMT, so we discovered Bitmap June 2023, and we were uniquely positioned to understand the value of Bitmap in the context of what a metaverse on Bitcoin actually meant. And part of the discovery of Bitmap was like this whole non-arbitrary nature of it. It's the fact that a block was a district and the transactions of that block were parcels of a district. And you have like 870,000 blocks or 870,000 districts, which represents the biggest metaverse. And we, from a metaverse background, we knew instantly that this was something new, something interesting, something that cannot happen on any other chain. And we did a video, 300 inscriptions turned into 800,000 inscriptions in 2 weeks. And so we played a big role in sort of like kind of uncovering Bitmap. And so that led to us we spent a lot of months trying to figure out, like, what was the thing that made Bitmap valuable? And that thing was that it was non-arbitrary. It's just based off the data of Bitcoin. And so we came up with this framework called digital matter theory that we released in November 2023, which is now exactly a year old yesterday. Mm-hmm. And all it was is taking block data and finding any pattern within that block data. And when that pattern occurred in the coming blocks, there would be a new token associated to that pattern. And that's all that was. Mm-hmm. And so on November 20th, 2023, a year ago, we launched the first token, the first non-arbitrary token using this framework under the TAP protocol. And it blocked out in 7 days, right? So Bitmap blocked out 2 weeks after we talked about it. This thing blocked out in 7 days. And now we have a wide distribution of this NAT token. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, Charlie, is because with our collaboration with TAP, the indexer, what we want to do is, instead of the new non-arbitrary tokens or the new NAT tokens that are being generated per block, instead of having some bot just inscribe it and dump it on the market, why don't we just direct that newly generated NAT tokens to the Bitcoin miners? A miner who happens to add the latest block on Bitcoin earns Bitcoin and they earn the NAT token. Mm-hmm. And so if we play out this theory, the NAT token is actually the bits field of Bitcoin. And so the reason why that's important is because as hash power goes up, the numerical value of bits goes down. And so now we have a token that is being sent to the miners, and there's a relationship between increasing the security of Bitcoin versus the decreasing inflationary supply of NAT. And now you have less supply because hash power goes up, more demand, and now you have a second subsidy for the network of Bitcoin.
Yeah, and
where are the bits? Where's the bits come from again exactly? I actually haven't read the documentation. Like where?
Sure.
Is it like the version bits in the block header, or is it like pulled from the difficulty adjustment?
It's a difficulty
It's
adjustment.
from the difficulty. Okay,
Correct.
gotcha. So it's got these preceding zeros, and the more difficult it is, there's more zeros.
That's
there's
right.
fewer numbers at the end.
Exactly.
That's where okay.
Yeah, and so
I looked at it really quick. I was like, I didn't really get it, but now I think I understand.
Yeah, and so what's cool is when we were figuring out which token to launch, because we knew if we just launched a Gitbook without a token, like nobody would care. We knew that, right? And so as soon as we launched the theory, we launched the token, and we had to pick a pattern, and we had to pick a field of Bitcoin that sort of made sense. And so we looked at the bits field, and we looked at the numerical value, and we looked at block number 1 was like 480 million. That was like the numerical value of difficulty. And then the latest block was like 380 million. There's like, this is a fairly, a fair number to kind of distribute across all the blocks. And then so we ran it. But at the time, we didn't really understand the relationship of the bits field as we do now. And we're sort of in the process of sort of directing newly generated NAT tokens to the miners so that it becomes a new mechanism for sustainability for the Bitcoin network without requiring a casino, right? A casino is not required here. Of course, it's beneficial nonetheless, but it at least adds another vector of sustainability for the Bitcoin miners, because we have a vested interest in the security of Bitcoin because of this framework. And obviously the entire planet has a vested interest to not have the network fail because there's no fees, right? So yeah, give us your take.
Gotcha. This is interesting because we don't know the full supply of bits. We just know that theoretically difficulty should go up. Therefore, bits should decrease in their issuance.
Yeah, so now the total,
so it's not a clear issuance path, but it's just directionally like, well, we know issuance of these will go down.
Correct.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
I don't think on a long timeline, additional assets issued on Bitcoin should theoretically not long-term outperform Bitcoin itself. So this is not a sustainable long-term mining revenue model. However, this is a mistake a lot of laser-eyed maxis have, which is because it's not Bitcoin, it's not worth owning. When I say I strongly disagree with that, because otherwise you wouldn't own a house or a car or things. So I strongly resonate with this idea of digital issued assets. As it pertains to this particular asset issuance scheme, I don't really know. It's no secret that I've never really thought it was very cool. I never really got it. But also I don't need to make like a very qualifying judgment beyond that. I think what's important, my main takeaway other than me saying like, I don't really get DMT, I don't really get NAT, it's not really my thing, I don't really think it's that interesting. What is interesting to me is that the market thinks it's interesting. There is significant demand for these assets, and I'm fine being agnostic about what I think about it, because like Bitmaps is a great case. I'm a very public like Bitmaps critic, but the thing is, the people want it. They pay for it. This is trading volume of an asset on Bitcoin. DMT, you have a whole NFT and additional token standard ecosystem popping up on top of Bitcoin. That's interesting to me.
Right.
And at the very least, it pays transaction fees. I don't think it is I don't think you should embed in the protocol I don't think you should enshrine in the protocol a way to try to pay or reward miners, unless your goal is to try to grab the attention of Bitcoin miners and to try to like solicit their participation. That would be a good like carrot to dangle out and say, hey, Bitcoin miners, these are now worth a decent amount. you should start participating in this. If we can get some of your buy-in, that would be pretty interesting. So that's my thought on it.
Sure. Yeah.
So far, I also haven't thought terribly deeply on this though. So
yeah. And no worries. I mean, that's sort of why, I wanted to quickly pitch that to you, only just to kind of introduce the concept, just because I know that, there's a lot of stuff going on Bitcoin, and it's not easy to pay attention to everything, but it is something that is interesting and sort of, non-arbitrary.
Yeah, it's something that.
And then what's the market cap of all this stuff? Because let's see, Nat Cats, you've got your 0.011. You've done hundreds of Bitcoin in trading volume. These things. This is a multi-million-dollar market. I don't know what the total value of all the various NAT tokens are, but it's a lot, and that's more than some other Bitcoin sidechain's entire TVL. So
right,
that's significant.
Yeah, and ultimately it's more about we have a free and fair token in the NAT token. There's 389 trillion supply, so it has a meme coin supply, but this supply is a non-arbitrary number. It came from Bitcoin. It's we didn't just select it out of thin air. And the whole idea is that we have essentially 20,000 holders, give or take. And we're okay, right now the subsequent NAT tokens are being botted. So why don't we just make an update where just for the NAT token is sent to the miners, and maybe we can get this to a market cap where it's at least added to the bottom line to these miners. It's not going to completely replace Bitcoin, but there's some contribution.
You know what's funny is the thing is one of my early criticisms of Bitmap or other types of namespace type protocols. I said this very early on is eventually miners will, if there's enough financial incentive to, they will eventually just take these for themselves.
That's right.
When you say it's being botted, I say it was always going to be botted.
Yeah.
And it's actually still not even been optimized for the miner side. They would just include in a lower transaction index in the block the issuance of the token to themselves. This has always been the case. So my thought is you could reduce that MEV incentive by just codifying or maybe enshrining in the protocol consensus that the token goes to the miner anyway. That might make sense. I don't know how you would handle the issuance, because there would have to be some way for them.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. So with BRC20s and TAP tokens, they function as account-based balances. And so instead of minting these assets in the way that you and I would, the balance of a particular miner just goes up because they mine Bitcoin, and therefore that block's value in bits field just gets added to their account.
So you would just take the Coinbase output, the Coinbase address, or the output to the Coinbase address, and you just, on the indexer side, you'd say you now have that NAT token.
100%.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that's the way you should do it. That makes sense.
Yeah. And so right now, like we were saying, that these tokens are being botted, Bitmap is also being botted, and I think there's a miner out there who is selfishly mining Bitmaps because they're paying for 50 cents worth of transaction fees to mine a Bitmap.
Oh, they're just including their own. They're including out of band Bitmaps.
Yeah. So what happens is whenever they win that blocks Bitcoin, that transaction where they paid, let's say 50 cents for a Bitmap, is in that roster of transactions. And so
do you know which pool or which miner it is off the top of your head?
I haven't.
You should hit me up. You should let me know who it is. This is interesting to me.
Yeah. I'll find out and I'll send it to you. But that's and so there's a miner already doing that, and so somebody's paying attention to that agree. And so we were like, okay, Bitmap is a non-fungible token, and we've created the first fungible token that is based off of the Bitcoin data. So just send it to the miners, and it already has a starting base of 20,000 users. Maybe we could get it to 100,000 or 500,000 users, and all of a sudden the market cap is $20 billion, and that's 10% of what they're currently earning in Bitcoin subsidy, right? 10%, that's huge.
Yeah, I would love to see it. I love thinking something is dumb and then being proven wrong. This is one of my favorite things because you never learn unless you think you know something and then you are demonstrated that you don't. So, yeah, I mean, guys, I mean, go for it. You have a huge platform. You have a big audience. You have, I think, multiple different entities all kind of participating in this.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah, there were. Yeah, this has, I guess, been like a pretty long, like contentious topic within, I guess, whatever this micro niche sector, I guess, that is happening within the ordinal space, right? I mean, mass majority of people who are focused on ordinals, you know, they're anticipating like a runes, now labeled Bitcoin meme coin super cycle, right? Like that's the extent of
which I actually kind of like. That makes more
Yeah.
sense to me.
Of
But
course.
yeah,
I mean, that's where we are today
Yeah.
as an overall market, right? So
Yeah.
of course that makes the most like product market fit sense for the today environment. But as we know, like things, you know, these narratives, they're fickle, right? And they come and go. And before you know it, new narratives are introduced. That's kind of like the whole ethos in the culture that's emerging within the DMT space, related to bitmap, related to nats and unats, all this stuff, right? These are things that at first, I mean, we've gotten a ton of feedback from people. There is a learning curve. It's a little too nerdy or just a little too far out. It's not what people are used to, and we knew from the beginning that was the task at hand, because you're essentially trying to convince everybody that
Yeah.
that the
the thing
arbitrary
is, like, you
way-
won't be able to convince everybody.
no, of course
But
not, yeah.
you also don't have to. Like,
No.
this is the beauty of markets and open and fair markets, is like, if you just convince enough people, like, you can make enough money, you can drive enough economic activity. Like, you don't have to. I think this is one of the things, like, Bitcoiners just get hung up on this. They like feel that they have to always be right and that everybody has to agree they're right. It's like my friend who is Bugsy, because I know him in real life. He's always like on Twitter, just losing his mind, trying to correct people. But the thing, and like, I love the guy, but the thing is, like, I typically like to say, here's my thoughts, here's my criticisms, and then I don't really have to like argue about it. Like, I mean,
I wish
I keep saying this all the time, like, it's the best thing ever is for a bunch of enemies or people who just disagree to like be forced to use the same blockchain. That's the whole purpose of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, I wish more people took your stance as far as like how to like participate and engage with these new ideas, right? But typically, it's contentious for sure. People, they do it taps into some sort of inner core, whatever part of that brain is, right? When you're trying to, I guess, change a thought pattern, change an expectation we've always had, especially in context of like producing digital stuff. Like somehow there's this new interpretation of how things can be done in a different way, right? And it's just innately is going to bring friction, right? And that conjures up usually a negative response in all of us, right? It's like, you know, it's just something that is discomforting in that. But to us, you know, it's typically, I think these are the types of thought patterns we need to kind of dive deeper into in order to, again, create something, a new inspiring vertical, right? Something that hasn't existed before. And again, that has that innate context of what makes Bitcoin unique as a chain environment itself, specifically in the metaverse, right? So I think that's why people who gravitate more towards the idea of the metaverse, I mean, a lot of people want to completely eliminate that from our palette of like consciousness at this point. But there's still like a core group of people who believe in these concepts, and you know, with that background context of the value of the metaverse, these new principles or ideas, they make a lot of sense, right? Just bringing in a lot of physical expectations into the virtual space, right? Which I think is what we're marrying together. So ultimately, you're right. This is the beauty and the nature of Bitcoin. It's permissionless. It's open. Casey did what he did because he had the ability to, and it was a true catalyst moment, and it brought us to this ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of other people. And therefore, like the experiment continues, it proliferates in so many different directions, right? And which is what I mean. There's no way all the, mission tokens have been discovered yet.
Yeah.
Because we don't know like what the directions of tomorrow, right? Specifically on Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think you said one thing that was interesting there is that the fact that something like DMT can only happen on Bitcoin. And when us coming from Ethereum and we coming to Bitcoin, we were like, what can we do here that cannot be done anywhere else? And like eventually we discovered DMT from it, but the fact that it's uniquely a property of Bitcoin, I think, is the most interesting thing. And when Murad talks about mission tokens, I feel like this fits that profile of a token.
Yeah, he's dead on with this.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Let's revisit that. So, yeah, the way I understood it is, meme coin super cycle at this point, his theory or thesis is pretty much validated, I would say.
Yeah.
Just off of like personal inquiries from my family and beyond, right?
Yeah.
He was spot on about that. But really, there's like an underlying, I guess, achievement or ethos around it. It's kind of like a mass scale game to find what the unicorn version of a meme coin, which he labels as mission tokens, right? Which are kind of takes cultish crypto behavior to the next level, where it has multi-cycle sustainability, right? Something like a Bitcoin you could label as like the first crypto cult, and now it's clearly the whole world is aligned on this mission, right? So, what is your reaction to his assessment on that, or do you have anything to add on top of that?
I think he's dead on. I think he's dead on about that. I also think he also says he doesn't even like the term meme coin. It's just the term we have, which is most useful to describe this. They are movements which have as associated some kind of like token. I think he's dead on with it, saying it is about the culture first. I don't think like a single meme is really that powerful beyond a single cycle. I would even use the case of like Doge. Doge actually occupies an interesting space in like broader crypto culture lore. Most Bitcoin OGs' first token that they really like enjoyed that wasn't Bitcoin itself was Doge, because in 13 it was like this fun, very lighthearted like meme thing on the internet, and they just grew to just love the very honest like no promises of Doge the token. And because of that, you have a lot of people who just they're not going to sell. It's been around a long time. It's had this very fair issuance scheme, and it's now classic. I think you can't do that with too many things, but I think it does make sense for this idea of a mission or a movement. I think he's just got the wrong blockchain. I think he a lot of his stuff he focuses on stuff that's been launched on ETH, which is fine, but if we consider that the mimetic energy in the broader crypto ecosystem is not with ETH right now, the energy is with Bitcoin and Solana and a couple other like newer chains, the Sui's or the Aptos or maybe even XRP. These are the things that people like. These are the things which are very resonant with people right now.
Yeah.
And Ethereum is not. And Ethereum, even at a structural level, is undergoing a lot of soul searching. There's a lot of like kind of reversal of their roadmap even right now.
Why do you think that is?
It's because of the merge, because of the proof of stake merge. This is a criticism many of us had, which is proof of stake is inherently centralizing. It is not necessarily a bad consensus. It is just not consensus for a chain which purports to be money. And so when you have what's called deterministic block production, when you have a leader election with who gets to produce the next block, and you are consuming no resource from outside the system, so all of the energy that goes into the consensus is exogenous, then it is inherently a capital concentration consensus mechanism. So we see this empirically, and now a lot of the ETH people are like, well, maybe we should have some kind of proof of work component to the chain. I don't want to get into that. They also had a role. They veered to a roll-up-centric roadmap, and now they're trying to say maybe they're not going to do that. I think this is probably just going to happen to every blockchain that's not Bitcoin Bitcoin, and Bitcoin will undergo periods of being really popular in comparison to other crypto assets and unpopular in comparison to crypto assets. I think right now it's very popular, but my point is, I think Murad spent a lot of time on ETH, and I think he is directionally correct, but mispositioned. And this is my view in that, to me, it's so obvious that the cults that he is describing are on Bitcoin. It is so obvious to me that that he is right about everything, except for the fact that the memes and the cults and communities and missions he describes, they will be created on Bitcoin and maybe Solana, maybe both. I just think that's the one thing he's missed, and that was the one thing he missed about what got him to liquidate. That's what liquidated him in 2020, was that he was giga-long Bitcoin, which was directionally correct, but something he could not foresee, but he was not able to adapt to, which was the market crash from COVID. He was just a little bit too mispositioned from a conviction standpoint. I think this hits a lot of people. Like, a lot of the hardcore Bitcoin maxis thought we would 100% hit 100K in 2021. And so they leveraged themselves to the tits. And then they all got blown out, even though they preached this conservative, like, DCA, don't get greedy mindset. So many of them did get greedy, and they just don't want to talk about it. I know this because I know these people. And I think they've learned, but like, this is a common trend in a personality type, is to be very good at being having strong conviction in a good direction, and then fucking up the execution. This is what everybody does. You got the trader who makes 3 million net worth peak from $1,000, grinding the shit out during a bull market, and they fail to pull any of it out, and they're on the back end, they have less than $1,000. Like, this is where it is not simply that you are right, you also have to execute correctly if you're going to try to participate. So this is why I caution everyone, like, it's fun to do this. You can make a lot of money doing this, but like, you have to be a realist about your ability to execute if you want to have additional asset exposure within broader crypto. Like, keep it simple, DCA Bitcoin, but the other things that you're going to try to do have execution risk. And so that's where, So I don't really know where I was going with it, but that's the thought tangent I went on following the Murad topic.
No, that's super interesting. I mean, I see what you're saying. From Murad's perspective and the Ethereum tokens that he's selected. And you're right. I think from the direction standpoint makes sense. The actual tokens may not make sense, especially when you're looking for mission tokens. And, we're over here, trying to come up with something at least native to the Bitcoin blockchain that does have, that addresses some parts of, the potential that Bitcoin may not be sustainable even 12 years from now. And so yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. So we have about a minute left, Charlie. I guess final words, anything coming up on your end that people should be paying attention to?
Yeah. I know I just shit on proof of stake, but I think one of the most interesting underreported trends on happening in Bitcoin is using Bitcoin as collateral for proof of stake consensus. You see this happening, and it's not as popular to talk about in the West, but it's massive in the East. And I think it may actually strictly improve proof of stake to use Bitcoin to stake. And the other thought is Bitcoin's almost at 100K. I haven't said this publicly, and I probably won't tweet it, but I bought a house yesterday because of Bitcoin. Been sitting on this for a long time. 100K was the unlock for that decision.
Hell yeah.
But I would recommend to other people who have not been in this situation before, who aren't public figures, or maybe who are, like, it's going to be very difficult to talk about Bitcoin. Nobody used to listen to. Now you have the opposite problem of everybody wanting your time and attention. Try to manage your personal life. Talk to other people who have experienced significant wealth increase very quickly and ask for advice. And then try to always remember like why you found this space interesting in the first place. Because if you lose that novelty and that magic, then I think you've kind of lost the soul of why you're even in here. So that's my advice. Otherwise, like, yeah, I'm gonna chill Blockspace. We have podcasts, Bitcoin Season 2, mining stuff, the Gwart Show, newsletters. We put together a conference, a more of a technical conference, but yeah, I mean, we produce a lot of content orthogonal to you guys. So yeah, I'll see whoever's watching this at conferences and I'll buy you a drink. So
hell yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah, Charlie, I mean, you've been one of the most sensible people that we found on Twitter, and in a space,
thanks, guys.
yeah, in a space that is like completely unsensible. And so
Dude,
we really,
everyone's insane.
yeah, we really appreciate your takes, and appreciate you coming on the podcast and every now and then kind of commenting on some of our videos. So yeah, I want to thank you for your time, and everyone else. All the links will be in the description. I appreciate all of you for watching, and we'll catch you in the next podcast.
Yeah. Cheers, guys.